The rain was a constant, drumming presence in Veridia, a city of steel and glass that perpetually tried to outshine the gray skies. Detective Elias Thorne navigated the city's slick streets with the practiced ease of a man who had long ago traded his soul for a pension and a perpetually damped trenchcoat. His partner, the brilliant but unsettlingly young detective Lena Petrova, sat beside him, the cold glow of a tablet screen illuminating her face. "Motive is simple," Elias grunted, pulling the car up to the curb of a sprawling mansion. "Arthur Finch, philanthropist and hedge fund manager, got caught in a home invasion. Robbers wanted the Renoir in the study, got spooked, and panicked." Lena didn't look up from her screen. "The Renoir is still on the wall, detective, and the silver is still in the cabinets. The alarm system was deactivated with an internal code. This wasn't a panicked robbery." Elias sighed. He had a theory, and Lena, with her inconvenient facts, was already picking holes in it. They stepped out into the downpour. The crime scene was a sterile tableau of tragedy. Finch was on the floor of his study, a single, precise puncture wound in his chest. But it was not the body that drew their attention. On the edge of the antique mahogany desk lay a mask. It was carved from a dark, polished wood, simple in its features, almost serene. Yet, it radiated a deep, unsettling stillness. "Look at it," Lena said, her voice low. She didn't touch it. "It's beautiful, and completely out of place." The mask had no eyes, no mouth, just smooth contours where a face should be. On the reverse, a small intricate symbol was etched, an encircled, upward-pointing arrow. The forensic team logged it, bagged it, but it held Elias's gaze. It felt like a signature, a mocking gesture. A week later, the city was abuzz with another headline. Julian Vance, the charismatic founder of a tech startup that promised to cure urban blight with sustainable energy, was dead. His death mirrored Finch's with chilling accuracy. Found in his meticulously minimalist penthouse, a single, precise puncture wound. And on a clean, white lacquered table, lay another mask. This one was identical to the first, save for the symbol on its reverse. This one was a downward-pointing arrow. "Two," Elias said, staring at the forensic photos on his desk. The rain had become a permanent fixture of his life. 2 masks, 2 dead men. We're looking for a killer, not a thief. Lena's analysis was already a dozen pages long. She had run the symbols through every known database. From ancient hieroglyphs to corporate logos. Nothing. The masks were the only thing the killer left. And they were the only thing connecting the victims. The media is calling him the mask killer, Lena said, her voice devoid of emotion as she spoke the sensationalist term. They were both members of the same exclusive club, the Aegis Society. It's a secret, old-money organization for the city's elite. Elias felt a prickle of unease. The names of the members were a who's who of Veridia's power brokers. Its philanthropists, its artists, its untouchables. So it's a grudge. Someone was kicked out, or an inheritance gone wrong. Possibly, Lena said, her eyes fixed on the masks. But look at the symbols. They're a set, up and down, a pair, a balance. The case went cold for another 10 days. The city held its breath, waiting for the next strike. Elias and Lena worked around the clock, mapping the lives of every member of the Aegis Society. They found a few grudges, a handful of bitter rivalries, but nothing that screamed ritualistic murder. And then, the news broke. Eleanor Vance, Julian Vance's estranged wife and a reclusive sculptor, was found dead. The body was discovered not in her home, but in her art studio, a converted warehouse in the city's industrial district. A single, clean wound, and the mask, this time with a horizontal line etched into it, lay on a sculpting table next to an unfinished clay bust. Elias stared at the photos, a cold dread settling in his gut. Up, down, horizontal, he murmured, "It's a pattern." "What's next, Lena?" "A circle, a square." "A sequence," Lena corrected, her voice tight. She was staring at something on her tablet. "It's a countdown, Elias. Look at the etching. It's not just a line. It's a single stroke, cut from a much larger, more complex symbol. It's a puzzle piece. Each death is a step closer to completing the picture." The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. They had no idea what the full symbol was, only the pieces. Lena, with the help of a team of cryptographers and pattern recognition software, worked tirelessly to decipher the masks. Elias, meanwhile, returned to the lives of the victims. He revisited their homes, their offices, their public and private lives, looking for a link that wasn't just membership in the Aegis Society. Arthur Finch, the financier; Julian Vance, the tech visionary; Eleanor Vance, the sculptor. A disparate group, bound only by the chilling ritual of their deaths. Elias found it impossible to believe it was a random act of a psychopath. The precision, the symbols, the ritualistic nature, it all pointed to a mind of staggering intellect. A person who saw these murders as a statement, not a crime of passion. Lena burst into the precinct on the fourth morning, her face pale, but her eyes blazing with an almost manic energy. "I got it," she said, dropping a thick printout on Elias's desk. "I ran a reverse engineering algorithm. The symbols on the masks, they're from an ancient Phoenician alphabet. But they're not words. They're numeric, a countdown." She pointed at the printout. "The first symbol is the Phoenician letter for 10. The second is 9. The third is 8. He's counting down. He's going to strike again. But not at a random person." Her finger traced a line on the printout, connecting the names: Finch, Vance, Vance. They were all on the Aegis board of directors. But they weren't just board members. They were the ones who made the pivotal decisions. They were the ones who founded the society, who built it from a mere club into an organization with immense power. They were the three pillars. A cold spike of fear shot through Elias. "Who's the last pillar?" Lena pointed to the bottom of the page. "There are only 4 founders listed in the Society's archives. The last one is the chairman, the figurehead, the one the whole society was built around." "Who?" Elias asked, a sense of dread rising in his throat. "Cassian Thorne," Lena said, her voice a whisper. "A prominent city councilman, a war hero, and your father." The name hit Elias like a physical blow. Cassian Thorne, a man he'd loved and revered, a man who had taught him right from wrong, a man who, years ago, had seemed to break away from the Aegis Society, citing a shift in its moral compass. But here he was, on the list. The last target. Elias's mind reeled. He refused to believe his father was involved in anything sinister. He had to be wrong. He had to be. They raced to the city council chambers, their sirens screaming, lights flashing in the pre-dawn gloom. They burst through the doors, their guns drawn, only to find the chambers empty. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of his father, but on his desk, meticulously centered, was a mask. This one, with a curved line etched into its back, the Phoenician symbol for 7. The countdown was still going. Elias felt a surge of rage and despair. The killer was toying with them. This was not a warning. It was a taunt. "He's not the victim," Lena said, her voice flat. "He's the killer." The realization was a punch to the gut, a betrayal so profound it shook Elias to his core. His father, a war hero, a man who had dedicated his life to public service, the man who had taught him integrity, was a cold-blooded murderer. The symbols, Lena said, her mind already moving, processing the horrifying truth. "I have to go back to the lab. I have a theory on what the full symbol is. It's not just a countdown, it's a key, a final piece of the puzzle." Elias drove back to the precinct in a daze, the city lights a blurred smear of color. He sat at his desk, staring at the grainy photos of the victims. Finch, the philanthropist; Vance, the visionary; Eleanor Vance, the artist; and now, his father, Cassian Thorne. It made no sense. Why would his father kill his friends, his colleagues? Lena returned an hour later, her hands shaking, her face a mask of horror. "I figured it out," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The Phoenician alphabet isn't just numbers. It's also letters. And the 4 symbols, up, down, horizontal, curved. They spell a single word, a word that describes the final symbol." She held up a printout of the full symbol, a terrifying, intricate design that was both beautiful and monstrous. It was a stylized, downward-facing mask, with jagged lines and sharp, inhuman features. It's the word Ankit, in Phoenician. It means to live, but not in the way we understand it. It's the symbol for the Egyptian concept of eternal life, a kind of godhood, a life beyond the mundane. Elias stared at the symbol, a cold feeling of dread spreading through him. Where is he now? "He left a message," Lena said, pointing to the last page of the printout, embedded in the code on the masks. It's a series of coordinates. They lead to the Old City Observatory, the one on top of the Veridian Tower. Elias knew the place. It was the highest point in the city, a place where people went to feel small and insignificant against the vastness of the cosmos. A place where a man who saw himself as a god would feel at home. They drove to the tower, their sirens a mournful wail in the night. The rain had stopped, and the stars were a faint, shimmering presence in the clearing sky. They took the elevator to the top, their hearts pounding in their chests. The doors opened, revealing a vast, dome-shaped room filled with telescopes and antique maps of the constellations. Cassian Thorne stood in the center of the room, looking out at the city below. He was not a monster. He was just a man, an old man, with graying hair and the weary lines of a life well lived etched into his face. But there was something in his eyes that made Elias's blood run cold. It was not the coldness of a monster. It was the terrifying, unblinking conviction of a zealot. "I knew you would come," Cassian said, his voice calm, almost serene. "The masks, they were a puzzle, a test, and you passed. You are your father's son, Elias. You have a good mind. Elias felt a wave of nausea. Why, Dad? Why them? Why my friends, my colleagues? They were not my friends, Elias, Cassian said, his voice devoid of emotion. They were parasites. They talked of charity, of helping the city, of a better future. But they saw the world as a game board, a place to accumulate wealth and power. They were the cancer in the heart of Veridia, and I was the surgeon. He pointed to a large, ceremonial wooden mask on a pedestal in the center of the room. It was the completed symbol, the ankit, the symbol of eternal life, the symbol of godhood. The Aegis Society was founded on a noble idea to build a better future, but it became corrupted. Its members became slaves to their own greed. They lost their purpose. They became weak, so you killed them, Lena asked, her voice tight with disbelief. You killed them because you thought they were weak. I purified them, Cassian corrected, his eyes fixed on the mask. I released them from their mortal failings. I gave them a chance to live forever, not as men, but as symbols. I am the shepherd, and they were the flock that had lost their way. The city needed a new beginning, a new purpose. I am its architect. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his bones. This was not a man who was mad. This was a man who had convinced himself he was a god. A man who saw murder not as a crime, but as a divine act of salvation. The mask he was staring at was not a symbol of evil. It was a symbol of his own twisted righteousness. You're wrong, Dad, Elias said, his voice trembling. You're a killer, a murderer. You're not a god. Cassian laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound that echoed in the vastness of the observatory. You don't understand, Elias. You can't, but you will. One day, you will see the world for what it truly is. A cesspool of mediocrity and greed. And you will understand why I did what I did. I am not the monster. I am the cure. The struggle was brief and brutal. Cassian was old, but he was a man forged in a war, a man who had seen and done things that no one else could comprehend. He moved with a cold, terrifying efficiency, his eyes focused on a single, unblinking point in the distance. He was not fighting for his life. He was fighting for his vision. He was fighting to complete his work. Elias, with the help of Lena, finally managed to subdue him. They handcuffed him, and the metal on his wrists made a hollow, desolate sound. He did not resist. He simply stood there, his eyes fixed on the city below, a serene, almost triumphant look on his face. He had failed to complete his work, but he had managed to make his statement. He had unmasked the truth. He had exposed the rot at the heart of the city. He had done his part. As Elias looked at his father, at the man who had become a monster, he felt a wave of despair so profound it almost buckled his knees. He had followed the clues. He had solved the puzzle. He had found the killer. But he had not found the simple, mundane evil of a madman. He had found something far more terrifying. He had found a man who had convinced himself that he was a force of good. A man who, in his own mind, was not a killer, but a hero. The masks were not a symbol of a man's descent into madness. They were a symbol of a man's terrifying ascent into a godhood that only he could see. The case was closed, but for Elias Thorne, the investigation had just begun. He would spend the rest of his life trying to understand the twisted logic of a man who could kill in the name of a greater good. He would spend the rest of his life trying to understand the kind of evil that wears a mask not to conceal its identity, but to reveal its true, horrifying purpose. The kind of evil that doesn't hide in the shadows, but in the glaring light of day. In the hearts of men who see themselves as saviors, not monsters. The kind of evil that is not a flaw, but a conviction. The kind of evil that is not a sickness, but a horrifying, transcendent truth.